Okay, good evening, everyone, and a very big welcome to the BRLSI for those of you here in the room, and a very big welcome for those who are online. My name is Tony Symes. I organise monthly lectures for the Herschel Society, and tonight's lecture follows in a really great tradition, because when the Herschel Society was founded back in the 1980s, this was designated the William Herschel Lecture, and was normally given by Sir Patrick Moore himself. So that tradition has gone on for more than 40 years now. The Herschel Society holds its lectures here with the support of the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. We bring together like-minded people who are interested both in modern astronomy and the historical contribution of the extraordinary Herschel family, and therefore we welcome new members, and I put some flyers out on the seats. And Bob Fosbury worked for the European Space Agency as part of ESA's collaboration with NASA on the Hubble Space Telescope. And he was with the European Southern Observatory near Munich in Germany. Fosbury joined this initiative in 1985, more than 5 years before launch. During the latter part of this period, Bob served on NASA's ad hoc science working group and ESA's study science team as they developed the instrument concepts for the James Webb Space Telescope. He's currently an emeritus astronomer at the European Southern Observatory and an honorary professor at the Institute of Ophthalmology at UCL, where he's exploring the interaction of light with life. He's given 3 lectures here from 2017 onwards, and given that track record, I really look forward to this evening. Over to Bob.
Well, thank you, Tony, for that kind introduction, and thank you for the Herschel Society to inviting me to give the Herschel Lecture this year. It's an honour for me. I'm going to take you on a journey this evening which hopefully sketches out the intimacy of the relationship between the Sun and all of life on the planet, the whole biosphere. We're learning that it's a much more intimate relationship than we had realised before, and I hope I can explain to you, although some of it is quantum biology, I can explain to you by using cartoons and so on what I mean. So I've listed the places that I've worked at while I've been somehow involved in this project, and I want to mention especially at the end the Guy Foundation, which is a charity, a family foundation which supports quantum biology around the world. They hold seminar series for quantum biology every few weeks during 2 seasons, and I'm on the faculty of that, and that puts me in contact with cutting-edge quantum biologists. I'm not a quantum biologist, I'm an astrophysicist. I want to start off just by mentioning the Herschel connections, and there are very strong Herschel connections here. William and Caroline Herschel were frequent observers of the Sun when they were here and when they moved to Slough. They were trying to develop heat-removing filters to allow the telescope observations of the Sun. You know it's very dangerous to do that. They wanted to look through their telescope, and they wanted to find a filter which would filter out the heat and allow them to look through the telescope. They failed to do that. But actually, during that process, they actually discovered that there was radiation beyond the red end of the spectrum that was invisible, and they called it invisible radiation. And when they presented this to the Royal Society in 1800, he was absolutely ridiculed for this, and he had to step back a little bit from this idea. And it was only 80 years later when James Clerk Maxwell developed the theory of electromagnetism that the existence of infrared radiation fell into place in the physical understanding of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. So that's the first connection. The other was with John Herschel, the son, who during the late part of the 19th century was working with other very prominent physicists in the time to try and understand what molecules were and why the sky was blue. And John Herschel played two roles in that. One, he was a very great stimulator of the idea that light actually reflected from the air. This was a great puzzle at the time. It was eventually solved and understood by Lord Rayleigh later on in the century. But Herschel was prominent in pushing that idea. And also, of course, he was working on the early days of photography when the ultraviolet radiation at the other end of the visible spectrum was realized to be a very powerful stimulator of the photographic process. I put this up to start with as a cartoon which really represents the story I'm trying to tell. I've got the sun on the upper left there, emitting light from an atmosphere which is around 6,000 degrees centigrade towards the rest of the solar system. And we're sitting within the biosphere, roughly at ground level on the planet, and we're absorbing light from the sun. Plants are absorbing it, we're absorbing it, everything in the biosphere at the surface is absorbing sunlight. And that relationship is much closer and more intimate than we had thought. And we're just beginning to unravel this now. And it's actually very exciting. And it turns out to be extremely important for the health of all animals and plants on the planet, but especially to people, modern humans, who spend a lot of their time in the built environment. As I will show, we're all in the built environment, we're being starved of this infrared radiation now, and that's having devastating effects on public health. We're all aware that public health is declining at the moment, and this is certainly one of the main reasons for it. I'll give you the bottom lines in case you fall asleep halfway through or a third of the way through. I'm giving you the bottom lines first, and it'll help you follow it through. Sunlight powers life on Earth. Now, that's not entirely true. We think there are microorganisms beneath the surface of the oceans, beneath the bottom of the oceans, which generate their own oxygen and work in a different way. But basically, all the life that we know is powered by sunlight. Of course, sunlight produces all our food, it produces our oil, gas, coal, all of those things. So everything is dependent on sunlight. And it is actually the ultimate super nutrient. It's our most powerful and most effective nutrient in the same way that food is. Now, life has evolved over billions of years, complex life over between 2 and 3 billion years, using light in many and subtle ways, and much of the light that it uses comes from beyond the ends of the visible spectrum. So visible light is obviously useful for vision. We can't see into the infrared for reasons which I could explain, but probably don't have time, but there's a very good physical reason why we can't see in the infrared. These colours beyond the visible are extremely important for the way life works. The biosphere is highly adapted to harvest and exploit photons from the sun. We don't notice this all the time. We know about insects and so on that have these beautiful iridescent colours and birds' feathers, the peacock's feather and so on. That's exploiting the structure, the small-scale structure of the animal or the plant to process light for special purposes. Now, we don't realize it, but animals are full of these nanostructures as well. We don't see them because they operate in the infrared, so we're not aware of them. But we're learning now that life is full of nanostructures which processes the light that enters the body. And this is very important. I'll explain that as we go on. The reason we're here, the reason we're doing this now, is that radical changes have been made to artificial lighting over the last few decades, driven by this quest for energy efficiency. We're driving everything towards energy efficiency at the moment. And in the process of doing that, we've removed the near-infrared wavelengths from the lighting. Of course, old-fashioned lighting, tungsten filament bulbs and so on, contained so much infrared that you wanted to get rid of it. But now we've removed that from our lighting, we are feeling the consequences. And it's now being realized that these changes are resulting in profoundly negative consequences for health by generating a state of infrared starvation for people who live within the built environment. The average American spends 93% of their time either indoors or in a car. I think Europeans are not much better, it's about 90%. And we starve ourselves of infrared radiation from the skylight, the sunlight, direct sunlight and skylight. And we've chosen to call this 21st century scurvy. It's not exactly the same as scurvy. Scurvy, as you know, is produced by vitamin C starvation. This is caused by infrared starvation, and actually it's a disease which develops over similar timescales. You know, the sailors used to sail to Cape Horn or Cape of Good Hope and suffer scurvy on the way down. But after 6 months on the space station, the astronauts are actually very sick, much more sick than NASA will admit to, because they're suffering from 21st century scurvy. They never see the sun. I mean, it sounds ironic. They're in a space station, but they don't see the sun. They live under the same white LED lamps that we use. So this is the plan of what I'm going to talk about. I'm talking about the sun, first of all, starts its journey, the light starts its journey to the Earth. Which of the colours from the sun actually reach the biosphere, reach ground level? Then the very important part, and it's a rather new development, how does light penetrate living tissue? You think, you know, we're opaque. Invisible light, we're opaque. You don't see inside the skin. But actually, in the infrared, everything changes. The light gets deep into your body. And I'll explain how that happens. And then in number 4, in the middle of the talk, I will say, what have we done to our lighting? I'm going to explain what we have done by lighting ourselves the way we light ourselves inside buildings now. And it's a catastrophe. Now we have to get down to the guts of the whole problem, and that's the mitochondrion. Can I just ask how many people have any idea what a mitochondrion is in the audience? Please be honest. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, that's pretty good. I'm not a biologist, so I can't explain mitochondria to you in infinite detail, but I know a little bit about what goes on inside them. And the thing about the mitochondrion, it's the organelle within life, and this is within all of life. You know, all complex life has mitochondria, plants, animals, fungi, and so on. It's the organelle in life which speaks quantum physics. When you're outside, you can get away without speaking quantum physics, but when you get inside the mitochondrion, it's quantum physics in the raw. And so it's very challenging to study what's going on in the mitochondrion, but significant progress is being made now, and it is absolutely a fascinating story. I'll try and take you through this. I won't have time to go into the details, of course, but I do have some cartoons which at least sketch out the basic ideas, so you begin to understand why this process is so important. And the basic point about the mitochondrion, it processes the energy inside, the energy that we have to use. The food that we eat, a small fraction of that food is to make what we call useful energy. It's only about 5% typically. The rest is radiated away as heat, waste heat. But about 5% of the energy that comes from our food gets used for useful energy, moving around and thinking and so on. We can do better than that if we live in a cold environment, but I'll explain that as well. And it's the mitochondrion that converts the food into useful energy, the energy currency of the cell. And I will tell you how that mitochondrion couples to sunlight, how it's linked to sunlight. And then very quickly at the end, last time I gave a talk here, I had Glenn Jeffrey, my collaborator from University College London, who talked more about the health aspects. All I can say is there's incredible amounts of evidence now that show that infrared light improves metabolism in all kinds of ways. I mean, there are lots of chemical trials, there are lots of trials, there are lots of proper studies, there's lots of anecdotal evidence, but there is a lot of evidence that the mitochondria are much healthier when they have access to infrared radiation. and the mitochondria determine how fast we age, hence my title. So I'll go briefly through that and talk a little bit about the future research, but let's move on because we have to move on. The beginning of this, sunlight starts its journey to Earth. Actually, I started off with the sun that you saw in the, or some of you saw. How many saw the sun in the assembly rooms here? Quite spectacular. My PhD thesis, which was over 50 years ago, was on stellar chromospheres, so the outer layers of sun-like stars. So it was very interesting to me to see that. I explained why the prominences are black against the surface of the sun. You know, those black strips over the sun. That was something I did over 50 years ago. I mean, I wasn't the only person to do it, but that light travels for just over 8 minutes before reaching the Earth's atmosphere, where some of it is absorbed. Not very much is absorbed, but a lot of it is scattered. And so quite a lot of what I'm going to be telling you about is light scattering. And one must realize that light scattering is different from absorption. If a photon hits my hand, a visible photon hits my hand, it'll perhaps penetrate maybe a millimeter into the skin, and then it'll get absorbed by a pigment, or a chromophore in technical language, and it'll be lost. But if I take an infrared photon, near-infrared photon, and shine it into my hand, it'll travel for about 2 millimeters, then it'll hit something like a cell wall, and it will bounce off it. And that's a scattering. So the photon remains the photon of the same energy, but it's moving in a different direction. And this photon will scatter many, many times inside the body, and that enables it to penetrate deep into the body. And the reason it can do that is there are essentially no strong absorbers in the infrared. This is physics, but there's a window in the infrared between the red that you can see and up to about 1.5 microns in wavelength, where living tissue is transparent. And so there are absorbers there. They're very, very weak ones, but I'll talk in more detail about that. But what reaches the ground and the oceans is available to nourish the biosphere, and that's exactly what it does in many ways which involve lots of quantum physics. This is an illustration of scattering, because I will be talking about scattering-dominated transmission of light. This is either a sunrise or a sunset, I can't remember, from the International Space Station, where you see the beautiful twilight colors. These colors are all produced by scattering of light. Blue light scatters more strongly than red light, and that enables the scatterer to sort photons by wavelength. I'm shining a torch through the eye of Rayleigh's fish here, and you'll see when the light enters the fish, you see this haze of blue light, because that's the light that scatters first, because it scatters much more strongly than the longer wavelengths. And then you see the yellow light, and then in some circumstances you see a kind of greenish light, and then you see the red light. But you see the red light penetrates much deeper into the body of the fish. This is all in the visible. And so this is a sorter. It's not like a grating which diffracts light in different directions and sorts it by direction. This sorts by penetration depth. So the blue light penetrates a short distance, and the longer wavelength light penetrate much deeper into the body. And the body is just like this fish, except it's all in the infrared, so you don't see it. But it's the same thing. The short wavelength infrared gets scattered in the skin. When you get deeper into the infrared, the light penetrates by scattering. And that's how the light gets fed right into the body. So a little bit about sunlight. I'm plotting a spectrum here, which is the brightness of light in the vertical direction and the color of the light along the horizontal direction. And I've shown on the top left a little patch that represents the visible part of the spectrum. So we extend beyond the red end of the spectrum into the infrared here. The grey line on top is the spectrum of the sun outside the Earth's atmosphere. So it's what you would see if you observe the sun from the space station. When the sun has travelled through directly, vertically down through the atmosphere, the blue light, some of the blue light will be scattered out of the way. It won't be destroyed, it won't be absorbed, it'll be scattered to make the blue sky. And the blue line at the bottom is the brightness of the blue sky in a clear sky. And the red line is the light that you get directly from the sun. And the dashed line there is what's called the Planck function. It's the spectrum of a perfect black body radiator, which is rather close to sunlight at a temperature of about 5,800 absolute kelvins. So I'm just going to show you how the skylight and the sunlight changes as you change the altitude of the sun. So this is looking directly upwards, so the sun from the equator looking directly upwards. And I'll go down to the horizon and show you how these spectra vary. So that's going down to 42 degrees. That's not a Douglas Adams quote. That's where 42 degrees is where you're at 1.5 times the depth of the atmosphere when you go directly upwards. It's commonly used angle for measurement. And so you see you're scattering more light and the brightness of the sun is decreasing a little bit. Actually, the brightness of the sky, I think, increased a little bit then. And as we go down further, 30 degrees, so the sort of angle, when we go down to 5 degrees, there's a big change. So the sky is becoming brighter than the sun at short wavelengths in the blue. The sunlight is very much diminished, in the direct sunlight is very much diminished because you're getting towards the red setting sun here. By the time you've got to the horizon, the sun has almost disappeared there. There's a little bit of red light you can see from the setting sun, but the sky is still incredibly bright in the blue. And people don't often realize this. Everybody associates sunset and sunrise with red and infrared, near infrared. All the adverts you see for near infrared lamps say, well, at twilight you get all the lights infrared coming from the sun. It's completely wrong. Most of the light is blue and it's coming from behind you because you don't look at it. So this is a blown up spectrum of the sky at twilight when the sun is just setting. And you'll see that the sky is now completely dominant. And this is the deep blue twilight sky that you see. You look up into the zenith, and it's this beautiful, deep, metallic, purpley blue, which is completely different from the rarely scattered blue of the daytime sky, completely different mechanism. It's due to absorption by ozone gas in the ozone layer. And the light is travelling tangentially through the ozone layer at sunset. And so the ozone absorption in the sunset in the sky is very, very strong. And so these are all models. I have an atmospheric model. I've modelled all these data. They're very good fits to the real data. And just to demonstrate the goodness of the fit, the purple band covering part of the blue spectrum there is overlaying the model, which is the dark blue line. The purple band is a measurement from my radiometer, which I have in the bag there. So I can model the sky quite accurately. So this is important if you're interested in circadian science and the effect of changing sunlight on the behavior of the body. And I think a lot of circadian people think of sunset as being bright in the infrared. And I know some of them realize that it's also very bright in the blue. And actually, the body uses that peak as the most accurate setter of the circadian clock, because you get that blue peak whether you have a cloudy sky or not. It doesn't depend on the brightness of the sky. It's always blue, whether it's cloudy or not. This I put in because it's an example of how life adapts to that blueness of the twilight sky. This is the inside of the eye of an Arctic reindeer. And the layer that you see there is called the tapetum lucidum. It's a reflector that reflects the light going into the reindeer eye. It goes through the retina to the tapetum and it gets bounced out again. And it gives the retina 2 chances at absorbing the photons. So it's an amplifier of the sensitivity of the reindeer eye. And in the winter, in the Arctic winter, it's all twilight. And so it has to adapt to very, very blue light. And it changes the structure of its tapetum to enable the reindeer to see much more clearly in the twilight during the winter. Now, I took this photograph in a lab at UCL. The hands of my collaborator who was actually doing the dissection of the eye. And I must say, I mean, I am an amateur photographer, and I have done lots of photography, but I never thought that I'd get a photograph in the National Geographic Annual Yearbook of Photography. It wasn't on my bucket list. But actually, this is from the 2024 National Geographic Yearbook of Photography. So I was kind of thrilled about that. But I'm using it for a genuine purpose to say that we as animals are no strangers to having nanostructures, the nanostructures that produce the iridescent colours of butterflies and bird feathers and so on. We're full of nanostructures, but they work in the infrared and deep in our bodies. And this is an example.
I've just had a request online. If you stand
Okay.
close to the microphone.
Right, okay, apologies, yeah. I'm drifting. When you get your clip-on mics, we'll be over this problem. And I have been complaining about this for 10 years, I have to say. So yes, we do. Animals use nanostructures for all kinds of purposes. And this one is vision, but we use them to get light into mitochondria. I thought I'd just, for those of you falling asleep, wake you up with some nice pictures. This is going from sunlight into darkness, and darkness is also extremely important for life, and we need periods in complete darkness, and we get very few periods of complete darkness now. This is a very, very big issue, and certainly we at home take great care not to use bright white LEDs in the evening. In fact, our house is full of tungsten filament light bulbs now with dimmers on them, but that's another issue. This is, I think, this is one of the best pictures I've ever seen. This was part of a Nature, the journal Nature, photographic competition this year, and I've borrowed this to show you the aurora on one hand and the Milky Way galaxy on the other. I think it's a wonderful example of a so-called dark sky. You've seen similar photographs to this before in previous talks. But this shows this blue, the green and the red glow, which is the air glow coming from oxygen molecules that are excited, oxygen atoms that are high in the atmosphere that are excited by sunlight, UV sunlight during the day and retain their energy for significant periods of time and release them at night. This is the same kind of light that comes from the aurora, but the process that excites it is different. In this case, it's sunlight during the day. In the aurora, it's energetic particles coming from the solar wind interacting with the Earth's magnetic field. But the spectrum of the light is very, very similar. And I think the reason I show this is the only reason you can see these lovely red and green glows in the sky is because of photosynthesis. So it's a signature of life. If we saw this looking from the outside of the Earth, we'd realize that the Earth had life on it because we could see these oxygen emissions from the atmosphere. It's a very, very strong biomarker. And finally, again, this is scattering. You can see the Milky Way there in the southern hemisphere. This is our observatory in Paranal in the northern Atacama Desert in Chile. Very, very clear sky place. You see this sort of triangle of blue light slanting up parallel to the lettering there. Does anyone know what that is? It has a name in amateur astronomy. Zodiacal light, exactly. This is dust in the plane of the solar system left over from the formation of the planets, which are still not coagulated into planets or asteroids or whatever. It's fine dust, and that's scattering light from the sun, and you can often see that when you're close to sunset or sunrise, if it's a very clear sky. And the other thing to say is that the range in brightness between full sunlight in daytime with the sun shining from high in the sky and this picture is 1 billion in brightness. So 1,000 million in brightness. Now our eyes, we can't see these colours, unfortunately, but we can see the air glow if we're dark adapted. So our eyes can encompass the most enormous dynamic range in brightness. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary that we can see over a range of 1 billion. And the reason we do this is that the rods in our eyes, the the monochromatic rods that we use at night rebuild themselves in the night to become extremely sensitive. They're effectively photon counters, and they're very effective at absorbing light. And at daytime, we switch those off. Actually, they disintegrate during the day and they rebuild again at night. It takes about 40 minutes to build them. And so, if you want to get fully dark adapted, it takes about 40 minutes in complete darkness to properly dark adapt. So we live under this extraordinary range of colours and brightnesses in the sky above us, and we very rarely look at it anymore, and it's a great shame. And I thought I'd show you these pictures just to remind you how absolutely spectacular it can be. So the third part of my story, how does light penetrate living tissue? Well, this is important to try and to explain. And I already said, in the visible, there are lots of pigments, chlorophyll, hemoglobin in blood. There are many, many pigments that absorb in the visible. When you get beyond the red that we can see, the far end, red end of the spectrum that we can see, we run out of pigments. And so the light then penetrates the body, but it bounces around many, many times. Now, that's my finger. It's put over a hole which emits a very bright, continuous white light spectrum, and you see it's glowing red. Now, I'm not sure, but I would say everyone in this room thinks that's red because blood is red. Well, it's not. It's the setting sun red. It's the scattering red. It's because you're scattering light. I could replace my finger with a 2 millimeter thick board of wood, like bamboo, and it would glow red exactly the same way. So this is scattering. This is the back end of Rayleigh's fish in that picture that I showed earlier. So that red light, that red light and infrared, this is actually a visible picture taken with a phone, but the next picture is taken with an infrared camera, a slightly longer wavelength, around 800 nanometers, which we can't see. And you'll see I'm shining an infrared LED through my hand from below. And what do you see? You see the light coming through, like through a bathroom screen, a scattering screen. And you also see the veins on my hand. Now, the veins contain deoxygenated blood, and deoxygenated blood has one of the few reasonably strong absorbers in the infrared spectrum. So you see the veins here, you don't see the arteries at all. And if I turn my hand over, that's my foot. I added that since the last picture. It's rather ugly, I'm afraid, but you get the point. I don't know what happened to the palm of my hand. Anyway, if I showed you my hand, you don't see the veins because all the veins are on the back of your hand. So by the time the light's got through my veins to the front of my hand, it's scattered so much it's all got mixed up. It's like a screen, a frosted screen. So I see the veins very clearly on the back of my hand, but I don't see them on the front. And notice you don't see the bones. It's not like an X-ray. The bones are scattered very, very strongly. This is why we can shine light through the skull and get light into the center. We can get infrared light into the center of the brain. And they're treating Parkinson's disease now by shining infrared light into the center of the brain. It's very effective for Parkinson's disease. And this is a cartoon of the way light scatters. It's coming from the sun, it's going down through the atmosphere, it's entering your body, and it's going a couple of millimeters, and it's scattering many, many times, typically 100 times. And these are molecules which are in principle could absorb it. But it's like a pinball machine where you fire a pinball into the machine, and it bounces off many, many pins, which don't give you prizes. And only very occasionally does it hit a pin that gives you a prize. So it's what's happening. It's like going into an IKEA store where the path leads you past every desk in the store and doesn't let you escape. Or going into an airport lounge where you have to go through the duty free, and you have to zigzag through the duty free so that you'll buy stuff on the way. And actually, this is a very important analogy, because what happens if you're on a motorway and on the M5 going up towards Birmingham, for instance, as an example, you're driving along the motorway at 70 miles an hour, there are 100 metres between each car, roughly, and everything's hunky-dory. They close the lane, and suddenly you've got a jam, and all the cars are 1 metre apart, and they move very, very slowly. This is what happens to when light enters your body. The infrared light enters your body, it scatters many, many times, so it spends a long time in your body, much longer than it would spend going straight through and out the other side. And that means light's continuously coming into your body from the sunlight, doesn't stop, but it's getting slowed down inside your body by scattering many times. And so it's rather like pumping up a balloon with air. You're pumping up your body with infrared photons, and you have a very small pinhole in the balloon which lets air out. That small pinhole is the very, very weak absorbers in your body that absorb the infrared light. And you have to wait a long time before this absorption happens. But there's nowhere else for the photon to go because it's deep inside your body. It has to scatter many times before it gets out. So it's this curious process which, it's an extraordinary process. We are full of infrared radiation when we're out in the sun. In fact, we would glow if you took an infrared camera. We would glow with infrared radiation. And I can demonstrate this. I think I've got the next slide. I can't remember the orders. Yes, there we are. There's an insect. It happens to be in a plexiglass thing. It doesn't really matter for this experiment. It's the only one I had. It's the only insect I had that was big enough. On the left there, the insect is placed over a sort of 2 millimeter hole in a bit of tin foil. And behind that is a 660 nanometer. That's a visible red LED light. And it's photographed with a visible camera. And you see the insect is effectively opaque to 660 nanometer infrared light, the red light. This one is taken with a near-infrared camera at 850 nanometers, is invisible near-infrared light. And I've got a 850 nanometer light behind the insect. Just look at the difference. It's extraordinary. No, it's not alive. No, it's dead. I mean, it would be slightly different if it were alive. I'd love to do it on a live insect, but I don't have the wherewithal. I do it with people, yeah. So you've done it with my hand. I've done it with my hand. I mean, it's the same thing with my hand. The hand glows in the infrared. And this means that the light goes into the body. This is very, very important. It's totally different from visible light. The infrared light goes into your body, and it can do stuff, and it does do stuff. Mushrooms, again, a wonderful example. I got these mushrooms from the market, and I'm shining a white light into a mushroom in all of these pictures, and you see it glows red, and there's no red pigment in a mushroom at all. This is sunset. This is sunset red. This is scattering. This is the back end of Rayleigh's fish. I showed this to Charlie Sturton, who's, I think, online here. He's not here, not in the room. No, he's online here. And said, what's happening in the mushrooms is that the infrared light coming from the forest coming from the forest canopy is getting into the mushroom, and it's travelling down the mushroom and getting into the sporing bodies in the gills. So the mushroom uses the infrared light scattered from the leaves, from sunlight in the leaves above the tree, to transfer infrared light into the sporing bodies, and gives it extra energy in order to generate spores. And in fact, this is a general property of reproduction. This happens in all seeds and fruits. They're very transparent in the infrared, and they focus the light into the seeds to give it that extra boost of energy. And it's true for animals giving birth as well. You need infrared light around the fetus. The amniotic fluid is transparent in the infrared. It allows infrared light to get into the fetus. And if you starve the fetus of infrared, it's not good. That's the lion's mane mushroom, which is absolutely pure white, sitting on top of my white light. It's extraordinary. This is vegetation in the infrared. Now, plants have mitochondria. They need infrared light, but they've got plenty of it. They're in sunlight all the time. They're not starved of infrared at all. And they don't want to absorb the infrared because it would heat the water up and it would evaporate the water. So the leaves would lose water, and they don't want to do this. So plant leaves are very carefully structured to get rid of the infrared light. And that means when you take photographs in the infrared, this is invisible infrared, again at around 800 nanometers, the leaves are incredibly bright, and you can see that the leaves are actually brighter than some of the white clouds above. And so this is the plant kingdom not only giving us food, but it's donating its infrared light to us to enable us to metabolize that food properly. It's a wonderful positive interaction, a bit like the mycorrhizal network in the fungi underground. The trees above ground are donating their infrared light to animals like us to metabolize properly. Beautifully structured idea. And the shadow under these trees in the infrared is much weaker than the visible light shadow under a tree. And I'll show you the spectrum of this. This is the spectrum taken by looking vertically upwards under a tulip tree just down the road, outside Charlie Sturton's house, actually, just down the road. A tulip tree is unique in having a very effective single-leaf covering of its canopy. It was pointed out to me by Charlie that this was true. So I was standing under the tree, looking at the spectrum of the light coming from the shadowed from direct sunlight, but looking at the sunlight coming through the canopy down to the ground. Look at this huge peak in the infrared, in the near infrared. This goes on into the infrared. This is of enormous value for animals that live in the forest understory. You know, there's incredibly rich biology in the forest understory, and it thrives because of the abundance of infrared radiation in the understory. It doesn't need the direct sunlight quite so much. It doesn't need the shorter wavelength quite so much, but it thrives by the excess of infrared radiation in the understory. Now, when you walk outside, you won't get if you're clothed anyway, you won't get the ultraviolet radiation going onto your skin. Will you get the infrared radiation? Well, the answer is actually yes. This is a set of clothes, my clothes. I've got a t-shirt, a shirt, and a jumper, woolen jumper, invisible light on the left. I've got the 660 nanometer light, the deep red light, shining behind the jumper, towards the jumper. You can just see a little bit of red light coming through. This is at 850 nanometers going through my clothes. So the clothes are effectively transparent. In fact, Sony stopped making infrared cameras in the early 2000s because people were taking advantage of the transparency of clothes for reasons which you can probably imagine. And Sony were scared of being sued for this, so they got rid of. So it's difficult to get infrared cameras now. But I had a camera I bought before 2000 to do this. That's another lecture, yes. That's in a different place. And I don't want to go into any detail here, but I do want to stress the importance of what we call photonic nanostructures. These are the structures that what we saw in the reindeer eye. That's a structure with a regular period of 100 nanometers or something like that, 100 billionth of a meter. And you know, you're all familiar with these wonderful iridescent colours that you see in butterflies and animals and some plants as well. They are used by some of these insects in ways which are probably not apparent to you. So a lot of the colours in the nanostructures in these insects are used for processing sunlight. In fact, some of the butterflies that have intensely black spots on their wings, these spots are so black that it's almost impossible to manufacture a black which is so black, 0.1% reflectivity. And the butterflies adjust the angle of their wings to collect just the sunlight they need to maintain their body temperature. And they have chitin structures in their abdomen that are also structured to radiate at much longer wavelengths, to radiate the excess heat away through a window in the infrared of the Earth's atmosphere. So they cool themselves by radiating to outer space from a structure in their abdomen, and they warm themselves by opening their wings to the right angle, and this is the way they control their temperatures. And many insects operate by controlling their absorption and emission of energy in that way. And there's a whole range of these things, and they harvest and process light, often at wavelengths we can't see. We only notice the iridescent ones. This is an example of a leaf of a begonia in the forest understory in Malaysia, where the light is so green under the forest canopy, the plant has to use green for photosynthesis. And green is very inefficient for photosynthesis. So the plant, the leaves, these are electron micrographs on the left. You can see those horizontal fuzzy black lines. You can see those are very, very small structures. The separations are about 100 nanometers in these layers. And they trap green light, and they set it up and create what we, in classical physics we'd call a standing wave. And they place their chlorophyll in the leaves just where the waves have their strongest peaks. And so they force the absorption of green light in the chlorophyll in the forest understory to do photosynthesis. So it's a wonderful adaptation. And now we're seeing this all over the place. I mean, these nanostructures are used for many, many different purposes in life that we've been blind to before. Another example, this is the structure around the nucleus of a cell. The nucleus is that dark thing in the middle. This is called the endoplasmic reticulum, and it's a very important region which manufactures proteins and manufactures ion gradients and so on for nurturing the mitochondria in the body. And these parallel layers are separated by about 200 nanometers, and that is the separation which will trap near-infrared light. And this is the way that we believe the infrared light is being forced into absorption deep in the body by getting trapped in these nanostructures. And all this can be modeled. It's relatively well understood, but the implications of it are very profound in terms of using the light for processes of metabolism. We're getting to the difficult bit soon. What have we done to our lighting? During the last few decades, artificial lighting within the built environment has changed from being thermal emitters, things that glow because they're hot, the sun, fires, candles, oil and gas lamps, Edison tungsten filament light bulbs. It's been changed to what we call non-thermal sources that emit light for different reasons, fluorescent tubes, LEDs. And the LEDs were developed because they emit mostly visible, well, both of these were developed because they emit mostly visible light and don't waste energy in the infrared. And that was a big mistake. It was a big mistake. They produce effectively no non-visible infrared, and we're living under them. This room is full of them. Every room is full of these white LEDs. And it's very rare to have a light inside that emits any infrared at all. These are very energy efficient, and we've saved so much money that we've bought many more of these lights, and now we light everything much more brightly, and we're using exactly the same amount of electricity that we were using before, except we're killing ourselves. So for the first time in Earth's evolutionary history, billions of years, this has broken the life's evolutionary adaptation to using near-infrared light for metabolism. And again, you've seen this light before. The only thing I've added here is the orange line, which is actually the sum of the direct sunlight and the skylight. And I'll take that through. So this is the same plot, but I've now shown two lamps. The green lamp is a white LED down in the 400 to 800 nanometer range. You can see the spectrum of an LED. And the red line is a tungsten filament light, a thermal light, with roughly the same brightness in the visible. And you can see the huge difference in the infrared. And I've marked three processes that go on inside our bodies, or not our bodies, but inside life. Vitamin D synthesis happens right down in the ultraviolet end, I won't talk about that at all, but that's very important for us. The green marks the regions that are used for photosynthesis, for making all our food, making our coal and oil and everything we use. And the red shaded region is this transparency window that I'm talking about, where we absorb the infrared. And so the old-fashioned thermal sources give us plenty of infrared light, but the LEDs give us effectively none at all. And we've had our access to sunlight eroded over the last few decades, and we're suffering the consequences. And the two extra things I've added there, the dark red curve there, you remember the picture of my hand? I looked at the spectrum of the light coming from off the back of my hand, and that's the transmitted light coming through my hand. So this is the light getting into the core of my hand, and you see it doesn't overlap with the LED, the white LED at all, only a little bit in the far red. So, you know, there's none of that infrared is entering my hand in white LED lighting. And the blue line there is proudly presented by glass manufacturers, window manufacturers, as their latest super-duper low E glass for rejecting everything other than visible light. When I was shown that curve in front of one of the major light manufacturers, glass manufacturers, I said, without thinking, that is a disaster. And that's the time when the finance manager looked up, because he got a bit worried about it at that point. But what we've done is we've excluded everything but the bit in white there, the bit inside buildings, inside skyscrapers, where you get this low-E glass. We only have the white LED, and we only have vastly restricted range of sunlight coming into the buildings. I'll just say, just for the record, the skyscrapers in Saudi Arabia, occupied by Saudi Arabians, they never go into sunlight without being forced to. They go from their buildings to their air-conditioned cars. They never go into sunlight. And the rate of type 2 diabetes in Saudi Arabia is 36% of the population. It's extraordinary. So this is the bit about the mitochondria. I'll try and explain it briefly and in a way which doesn't demand deep knowledge of quantum physics. But to show you one or two sort of numerical factors which just show how closely these mitochondria couple to sunlight. The top pictures there are electron micrographs of mitochondria. We have old mitochondria and young mitochondria. Mitochondria age. As you get older, your mitochondria get less efficient at producing energy. And this is why most of the people in this audience, not all of them, will benefit more from infrared light than the few younger people in the audience. So just to give you an idea of what a mitochondrion looks like, it has, again, these regular nanostructured layers in it. I think the image I want you to take away is that this mitochondrion in our body, in fungi, in animals, and in plants, the mitochondria couple to sunlight, like with a USB cable. They couple directly to sunlight. And they also couple to the sources of food in animals. And also in plants. Plants have to build. The mitochondria in plants do the same thing as they do in animals, essentially. So you have a food source that goes into the mitochondrion, and you have a source of light. And it turns out the energy in that light plays a crucial role in photosynthesis. The energy in the photons from the sun gets converted into sugars. It's actually the solar energy that's converted directly into carbohydrates, into sugars. For photometabolism, it's fundamentally different from that, but it's just as important. The sunlight enables the mechanisms in the mitochondrion to work efficiently. And if you think of the mitochondrion as being a car engine, if you are sitting with if your mitochondrion is in darkness, it's like a car engine with no cooling and no oil in the engine. It'll work, but it'll splutter a bit and it won't work very efficiently. As soon as you switch the daylight on, there's enough energy coming from the sunlight to lubricate the engine and to cool it. And it does this in two different ways, which we're beginning to understand, but I won't go into detail. I think stick with the analogy. So as soon as you walk out into daylight from getting up in the morning, you're suddenly in a totally different environment. Your mitochondria are flooded with infrared light, and they suddenly come to life. They've been spending all night in the darkness, sort of servicing themselves and rebuilding themselves, and getting new proteins on board and so on. But as soon as you come out into daylight, they suddenly switch on. Now you'll all carry this image of reptiles, lizards, and so on coming out in the morning and basking on a rock in the sun. Now all the biologists would tell you that they come out because they're cold-blooded. They come out to warm up. Actually, they're coming out to boost their mitochondrial efficiency, so they can run fast and escape predators, or they can run fast and catch something that they're predating. So this is an experiment that we're encouraging the biologists to do to test that hypothesis. But I'm pretty sure that's what happens. They come out, and by basking in the sunlight, they're tuning up their mitochondria to give them more energy. Little bit of solar physics. Don't worry about the diagram too, the details of the diagram. This is another spectrum. It's the sunlight, but it's plotted in a different way. It's the same sunlight, but I've plotted it against energy rather than wavelength, and I've plotted it as number of photons per square meter per unit energy. So it looks different in shape, but you'll see this extraordinary peak at about 3/4 of an electron volt. This peak is driven by a special characteristic of the solar atmosphere. The solar atmosphere, at a wavelength corresponding to 3/4 of an electron volt, which is about 1700 nanometers in the near infrared. The solar atmosphere is especially transparent at that wavelength. And when you have a transparent atmosphere, you look deeper into the atmosphere. So the light we receive from the sun at that infrared wavelength coming from deeper in the atmosphere where it's hotter. And since the amount of energy that you get from a hot body depends on the fourth power of the temperature, that makes a big difference. So the infrared radiation is coming out from a deeper layer, which is hotter. So you're getting more. This is the Planck function, which I showed before, the red line. You're getting more than you would get from the Planck function. And this peak corresponds exactly to the transparency window in the body, where these photons get into your body. So it's a wonderful coincidence that the maximum solar output comes into your body and is used for driving metabolism. This, of course, is a wonderful biological evolutionary adaptation over billions of years, but the design of mitochondria and the way they operate has taken advantage of the fact that the sun gives you an extra kick at these wavelengths. And so that's the first coincidence which makes you believe that this story is for real. This is something very special about the relationship between the structure of the sun's atmosphere, and the usage of that sunlight by the biosphere. This is a mitochondrion, a simple diagram of a mitochondrion, which I thought I wouldn't go through, if you don't mind. But if you're a biologist, you will have learnt about this at university or at school, about the Krebs cycle. I never learned this at school, but I know at least one person who did learn it in the audience, but we won't ask him to explain it. I've made a cartoon of this. And the cartoon, very appropriate for Bath, the cartoon is like a flight of locks. The slanting line there is what the electrons that come from the food we eat have to get down in order to make the energy that we use in our cells. So it's like going down a sequence of locks. There are 4 complexes in the mitochondrion, which are like lock gates in a sense. So, the electrons get trapped in front of the lock gates, and they have to have enough energy to either get over those walls on the way down. It's like having a hydroelectric power scheme where you have a big lake on top of a mountain, and the water flows down, but you have these hills on the way. And, the water builds up another little lake there, and it has to eventually to get over. So it doesn't run straight down in one go. And that's the reason the mitochondrion has 4 complexes. You can't do all this in one go. You have to do it in little hops, bit by bit. So you have these barriers on the way, and you have to jump over these barriers somehow or get through them. Now, there's a numerical consequence. There's a numerical coincidence here, which I actually only realized this week. Your body contains about 10 to the 21 of these electron transport chains, we call them. There are many, many of these electron transport chains inside one mitochondrion. But in the whole body, you have about 10. Now, you can't imagine 10 to the 21 as a number, but 10 to the 21 is roughly the number of stars that we could possibly see in the entire observable universe. And this is the number of electron transport chains that are working away in your body at the moment to produce the energy that you're using to think or fall asleep with. Now, I also realized the photon rate from the sun that gets into our body is around 10 to the 21 photons per second per square meter per electron volt. And so there's a beautiful match between the energy coming into our body from the sunlight and the energy needed for getting the electrons to travel down the electron transport chain. So I was talking about intimate coupling between the sunlight and life. This is one of the intimate couplings. Now, those numbers are very approximate, but the fact that they're even close, I think, is telling us there's something really important going on there. ATP is the adenosine triphosphate. This is the molecule that we use for all our cellular energy, the fuel that we use in our cells for doing everything. And we generate our body weight in ATP molecules every day. So we generate tens of kilograms of ATP every day. But of course, we use it almost immediately, so it gets recycled many, many times. But overall, every day, we generate 50, 60, 70 kilograms of ATP, and this is the energy that we use in our body to allow us to think and to move around. I am near the end, Tony, so don't worry too much. The waste product of this electron transport chain is combining 2 oxygens, oxygen with 4 hydrogen nuclei, protons, and 4 electrons to make 2 water molecules. And actually, the other thing I realized is, when you get up and pee at night, you think, I really didn't drink that much last night, so why do I have to get up so many times in the night? Actually, you produce a lot of the water by respiration inside your body. You don't have to drink this water. You're producing it from the oxygen you breathe, using the electrons that you use to generate your energy. It makes you much happier when you get up for the 3rd or 4th time in the night. So I didn't actually drink all this water. I generated it by thinking, by not being asleep. The other thing that I might point out, every time the electron goes past one of these barriers, it pumps protons through this membrane in green at the top. And protons, of course, are charged. They have a positive charge. It leaves a negative charge inside the other side of the membrane. So you have a voltage gradient. You build up the electron flow down this chain, builds a voltage gradient across this membrane. And this voltage gradient is about 30 million volts per meter. It's about the same as an intense lightning strike. The thing is, that barrier is only a few nanometers across. And so it's only 200 millivolts, in fact. But the gradient is extreme. So there's very strong electric fields in the mitochondrion. And this is very important because these electric fields do all kinds of things. So that's the simple version of the mitochondrion. I find it easier to understand than the first one I showed you, but the chemists probably wouldn't agree. But there is this numerical coincidence, which I think is actually very important. And I just wanted to touch on one extreme quantum effect. The only reason we can survive in darkness, and we do survive in darkness for some period of time, we can't survive forever in darkness, but we do survive in darkness. The only reason we survive in darkness is because some electrons can get through this barrier, not by going over it, but by going through it. And this is what's called quantum tunneling. It's an improbable event, but it happens often enough for us to survive in darkness. As soon as we walk out into sunlight, we don't have to bother about quantum tunneling anymore, because we can leap over the barrier without any difficulty. But it means that when you're in darkness, you can't generate huge amounts of energy from your mitochondria. And there's another extraordinary coincidence here, which is a little bit more subtle than the other one. But I was talking about photons with energies of around 1 electron volt. Well, a photon with an energy of 1 electron volt is about 1200 nanometers. It turns out that if you give that energy from a photon to an electron, and you give the electron 1 eV of energy, that electron then has a wavelength of around 1 nanometer instead of 1200 nanometers. It's what's called the de Broglie wavelength of an electron. You know, the electron microscope works because it's a wave. The electrons work as a wave, but the waves are much shorter than light wavelengths. That's why you have higher resolution microscopes. So it turns out that the 1 eV photons that you're getting from the sun perfectly match the thickness of these barriers in the mitochondrion, which is 1 nanometer. And if the wavelength of the electron is close to 1 nanometer, it can tunnel through this much more easily. If it's any more than 1 nanometer, very quickly, exponentially, the ability of the electron to tunnel drops very, very quickly. So again, there's a wonderful adaptation between the wavelength of the photon and the structure of the mitochondrion that enables this to work. So the ability to quantum tunnel enables you to live in darkness. And we're nearly at the end of this, so don't worry. This gives you, don't worry about what's on the axis or anything. It's just a diagram which shows 3 regions. The temperature, you have to cover the range of energy covered by this black arrow. The temperature of your body at 37 degrees centigrade, you never get there. You couldn't live with just the energy from the kinetic energy from the molecules in your body. The quantum tunneling allows you to do this, but at a low rate. As soon as you switch this sunlight on, that blue region fills with energy, and you have lots of energy to choose from to get the mitochondria working properly. This is why, when you walk out into sunlight and you sit in the shade of the tree, you feel so good. You know, everybody does. You know this. It's because you suddenly your energy system is working properly. Another one of, again, don't worry about the diagram so much, just look at the green and the red regions. The solar irradiance, the solar energy reaching living tissue from the sun in the range of the transparency of the body, where it penetrates deeply, is about 500 watts per square meter. If I cut your body into 2, to slice you through at 37 degrees centigrade, your body would radiate 500 watts per square meter into outer space in infrared radiation at 10 microns. So the energy coming in from the sun would then be in almost perfect balance with the energy being re-radiated. But the sunlight, the energy from the sunlight are the photons that have traveled through your body and performed all kinds of basic biological functions. And they come out as heat at the end, which is what we call high entropy state. They're very disordered. It's just waste heat. And that gets radiated out into space. And the reason I'm showing you this now is that when we sit in a room with 37 degrees body temperature and we're surrounded by walls at 20 degrees, we only have 17 degrees difference in temperature between our body and the walls. And that means we can only generate a very small amount of useful energy, something like 5%. If we walk out into 5 degrees centigrade, like the Fuegian Indians in Tierra del Fuego, at 5 degrees, and we're naked, it's kind of uncomfortable, but we can generate more than twice as much useful energy because of the temperature difference between this. And this is pure thermodynamics, high school, second law of thermodynamics. So, the surroundings are terribly important. And I say it in words there. I've already explained it to you, so I won't go through that again. But what I will say is that a clear blue sky, when you go outside under a clear blue sky, the temperature of that blue sky is about minus 40 to minus 50 centigrade, much colder than the temperature of a wall in a room. So if you walk outside and you, again, sit in the shade under a tree, which I've said to several people this evening, it's the best place you can sit, and you see the blue sky, where the sun isn't, you see an open blue sky, you can radiate your excess heat to that blue sky much more effectively, and it gives you much more energy. And one of the things we're going to do is to look at sports record performance and see if that correlates with the nature of the terrain that people are operating in, and whether they see a blue sky and how much direct sunlight they're in. And I did this cartoon, so this encapsulates several things that I've been talking about. One is the sun is at nearly 6,000 degrees, radiates onto the tree, makes food, not necessarily the tree, but it does photosynthesis. You're sitting under a tree eating a sandwich. You're at 37 degrees, 310 kelvins, but you see the blue sky, so you're radiating to a blue sky. So you feel really happy and comfortable there, forest bathing, wonderful. You feel better there than you feel anywhere else because you can radiate into the sky. The ambient ground is only at 20 degrees centigrade, so you radiate much less effectively to the ground than you do to outer space. So what this means is that, we are essentially heat engines. We're using a temperature difference between our body and our surroundings, 37 degrees and minus 50 degrees, as an engine, but we're also using a radiative engine. We're using the temperature difference between the sun at 6,000 degrees and our surroundings to drive the radiative processes. This is an enormously powerful heat engine. And so I've actually got a heat engine here. This is a Stirling engine, a heat engine, which is operating at a temperature difference which corresponds to you sitting in the room at the moment. So the plate there is about 40 degrees, and the surroundings is sort of room temperature. Now here I've put an ice pack to cool the top surface, and you'll just notice the rate at which that is spinning. There's supposed to be sound there. I couldn't make it loud enough, but you'll realize that it's getting faster. It's cooling that top plate down to about 0 degrees centigrade. You see it's really speeding up now. It gets about twice as fast. And that's what I mean by you getting much more usable energy if you have a cold environment. And this is why, when clothes were developed, you could go and live close to the Arctic, and you could keep your body warm, but your lungs would breathe in cold air. And so you have much more energy when you live in a cold environment. The navvies that built the canals, they couldn't have done that in the tropics because they couldn't have generated nearly as much energy. Okay, well, we can. If you want to ask questions about the medical things, I can do my best to answer them, and I have other people who are working on this. But the amount of evidence that we've collected over the last year, since I gave the last talk, is quite considerable in favour of the effectiveness of infrared light on mitochondrial function. There are many, many papers about this now, and these are all the diseases of aging which will be directly affected by healthier mitochondria, which you get by going outside or having proper lighting indoors. So where are we now? We've argued that the changes in the environment have produced these problems of for starvation, and there's now extensive experimental evidence for the health benefits of exposure to full spectrum daylight. All-cause mortality is far lower for people who've spent a lot of time in sunlight than it is for people who spent a lot of time indoors, even skin cancers, everything. And the starvation now, coupled with the increased consumption of ultra-processed foods, is a perfect storm for these metabolic disorders. And the light and the ultra-processed foods are very closely related in ways which I really don't have time to explain. But ultra-processed foods are very disordered. All the structure in the foods, all the physical structure, the nanostructures, the chemical structures, no amino acids, no complex chemicals in ultra-processed foods. It's just reduced down to pure chemical molecules. They're of almost no nutritional value at all. They're called maximum entropy foods. They allow your body to metabolize things which are of no value for controlling bodily functions at all. I'm perhaps exaggerating that very slightly, but not very much. The ultra-processed foods have very little nutritional value. And that, coupled with the absence of the infrared light, is, I think, the combination of circumstances which is driving the very poor physical health at the moment of the public population. We have to solve this problem if we're going to solve the NHS problem. What are we actually doing? We're having lots of contact with the lighting companies and architects. They're very attentive to this. We need to take urgent action for critical indoor environmental lighting, especially in hospitals, and especially intensive care units. Intensive care units have toxic lighting. They have this bright blue, white LED lighting 24 hours a day. This is killing people. You remember all the people who died in COVID in intensive care units? It was a battlefield. Doctors, nurses, patients. I have to say, it wasn't all due to lighting, but I think lighting would have made a huge difference. We have the example of the astronauts, which I mentioned. They come back very sick, and they all have this common problem called mitochondrial dysfunction. So people should be encouraged to spend time outdoors, especially children. You know, whilst excessive exposure to direct sunlight can be avoided, should be avoided, the benefits of daylight far outweigh the dangers. And we go back 100 years and more with this. Florence Nightingale said the best thing you can do if you're sick is to get in the fresh air and sunlight. And they used to wheel people outside. So this is incredibly important. Progress in quantum biology of photometabolism, which I've been talking about today, is needed. We're way behind the understanding of photosynthesis, but it needs to be understood as well. And I was saying to one or two people beforehand, I think the astrophysical connection here is actually much more important than I thought. The astrophysical problems are very similar because they're dealing with the interaction of starlight with interstellar nebulae and so on. The biological problem is dealing with the interaction of starlight with the biosphere. But the techniques of modeling that process are very, very similar in the two cases. So there is actually much more of a direct connection between astrophysics, which is what I do, and quantum physics, which I'm trying to avoid learning at the moment. If you photograph that, this is an extremely good podcast from one of our American collaborators, who's a qualified medic in California. He's also an extensive medical educator. He has a YouTube channel called Medcram. This is, I warn you, this is a 3.5-hour podcast. I haven't thought of it myself. But it's absolutely brilliant. And it really, you know, the evidence is absolutely... Sorry? The microphone. The evidence is very, very strong from that. He could explain it much better than I could. But anyway, if you get a chance to have a look at that, the first hour is probably sufficient, but it's extremely good. This is just a reminder of where we're going now, and this is a catastrophe. This is an absolute catastrophe. These are my credits. They're in alphabetical order, so no importance is attached to them. Thank you very much. And I know I've gone on too long, but there we are.
Okay, we'll take questions now. And you must speak into the microphone so the Zoom audience can hear you. And you need to hold the microphone up like this to make it work properly. I'll give one to my daughter here to do this side, and I'll give you one to do the other side.
Thanks, John. Yep.
Thank you very much for that talk. So you mentioned the importance about getting outside. Is there a recommendation on that? You know, are we talking about 10 minutes a day? Are we talking about an hour, a couple of hours? And I've also got a second question as well. Is there anything else that we can do on a domestic level to increase our exposure to infrared light? I'm thinking specifically, I went to a sauna last weekend, and they had an infrared light in the sauna. You know, is something like that of benefit, or you know? Is there...
Yeah. Okay. Well, let me answer the first question first. It seems that the benefit of this infrared light is maximised in the morning. If you get up and go out into daylight early in the morning, it doesn't have to be direct sunlight. You know, daylight is still very, very much brighter than indoor lighting. So just any daylight is very good. And in the morning, and I don't think you don't need very much. You know, 10 minutes, half an hour, whatever, in the morning. When I use infrared lights in the morning, I generally use them for about 10 minutes. And as far as the lighting is concerned, yes. I mean, the issue is here, it's very cheap to do this. You'll be charged huge amounts of money by people selling you red lights to do medical things. But actually, the best thing you can do is to buy an old-fashioned tungsten filament bulb and run it with a dimmer, which will allow you to keep the filament going forever. So you just turn the voltage down a little bit. I do this all the time, an angle poised lamp. And if you can't buy a tungsten filament lamp, because they're all running out of the shops now, get an oven lamp. There's a 40-watt bulb you can buy to put in your oven. They have to be tungsten filament because you can't put an LED into an oven. And so what I do, I buy, they cost like £2 or something. You buy a 40-watt tungsten filament bulb, use it in an angle poised lamp, use it as a reading lamp, plenty of light for reading, and I also use it for healing wounds and things like that. The wound capabilities of this tungsten filament bulb is remarkable. I cured a leg ulcer in a week just by shining a 40-watt oven lamp on my skin every morning for 10 minutes for a week. It's dramatic.
Hello. Bob, that was a really good talk. As you remember, we came to your previous talk, and one of the outputs of that was, one, I go for a walk every morning to get a bit of sunlight, and two, you convinced me to go onto Amazon and buy an LED lamp. You said that you weren't getting any money from it, but I have mine on for 20 minutes. So my question is that we talked about the benefits, or perhaps the horrors, of LED. I was reading about the Japanese chap who invented the blue light, Nakamura, in his Nobel Prize in 2014. Obviously, he was very happy with that, and we've got him to thank or to blame for the fact that we've now got white lights and low energy. Is there some push to have an infrared built into new lamps? Could that be one of the solutions? Yes,
it is one of the solutions, and it's one of the solutions that's being worked on by the lighting companies we're working with at the moment. There's nothing wrong with the white LED for vision. In fact, we would keep them for vision, but it's when you operate them without the infrared. We're adapted to work with very strong blue light as long as we have strong red light to go with it. It's the blue light on its own which proves to be so damaging. So there's nothing wrong with the white LEDs per se. It's just they have to be supplemented by some source of And the LEDs, yes, the advantage of the LED that you have at 850 nanometers is it's at the peak of the body transmission curve. So it does a lot, although we think the longer wavelengths are also doing a lot. But the 850 nanometer on its own is doing quite a lot. So it's a very useful lamp. We use them we turn ours on every morning for half an hour when we get up.
It's transformed me and my dad. We're like new men. It's been absolutely amazing. But there my only surprise was I thought that we would be bathed in infrared light during your lecture tonight. So I'm somewhat disappointed.
I'll tell you what I did last week. I went down to the market, the Guildhall market, and I bought a 250 watt heat lamp, which is a filament lamp with a red glass and a dimmer. And I run it at 100 watts, not 250 watts. And I run it in my study. And actually last week our thermostat failed, so the ground floor of our house was freezing cold. And I ran this lamp in my study at 100 watts all day, and it was wonderful. Fine. And the thing about heating, sorry, I know we're running out of time, Charles, but the thing about heating, it's crazy to heat a radiator with electricity to 50 or 60 degrees centigrade because you're creating high entropy heat. You're wasting the high quality of the electricity that's used to generate. What you should do is to generate energy above 2000 degrees, like a candle, above the brightness of a candle, and shine it through your body before it comes out as heat. And you don't take that out of the lighting budget, you take it out of the heating budget. So you generate your light with electricity, so you generate enough near-infrared radiation. So it has to be at least 2000 kelvins. I usually use 2400 kelvins as a representative number. And you shine it through your body, and it'll heat. The heat is not wasted at all. But, the photons have very low entropy. They're highly ordered. And so the body gradually makes use of all that order for controlling the structures, the building of the structures inside your body. It does the whole metabolic thing inside your body before it comes out as heat, and you've not wasted anything. So it's simple to do, but it's very hard to implement because we're so, built into the built environment. But we do have to do it in a very different way, and people are working very hard on this at the moment. It's we know pretty well what to do.
Is that one down there? Yep.
Thanks so much, Bob. It was fascinating. Am I being heard? Sorry. Yeah. I was sorry, can you hear me? Oh. I was fascinated with this relationship between the biosphere and the source of the photons that we receive by way of sunlight. And, obviously we've evolved in a way that the mitochondria actually can adapt to different forms of light that we receive and process it in a way that our body can use effectively. So we can adapt to living in darkness for a long period and living in sunlight for a long period. So I want to move from the infrared side of things to the other end, to the ultraviolet, because obviously our body hasn't adapted to using ultraviolet in a productive way, because we have to protect ourselves from ultraviolet. So I was wondering what your thoughts on that are.
Very quickly, the answer to that is, what do we do about the ultraviolet? We don't need very much ultraviolet to generate vitamin D. In bright daylight, we generate it rather quickly, so we don't need to spend very much time. We certainly don't need to lie on a sunbed all day in Spain to generate enough vitamin D. So we use the UV we can get from there. The other thing is that in the winter, we get still plenty of UV from the sky. We don't get it from the sun directly, but we get it from the sky. And we can we can utilize that. But the trouble is we have to bare parts of our body to allow us to get our vitamin D.
One more here.
Well, I told
Negative.
you I told you we don't need to spend much time in the UV, so we don't need to suffer the negative consequences. We don't need to suffer the sunburn. That's a very, very good question. I was hoping somebody would ask that question, actually. I think the only reason the people who live in places like Tromsø in the Arctic and the Eskimos, the only reason they survive is because they have fires, they have open fires. And the yellow flames from open fires are fine for doing this. And I've talked to colleagues in Tromsø, and they use wood fires all the time in the winter. So the wood fires are good. Sue?
Yeah, one, yeah, sorry.
So, Bob, can you repeat what the last question was? Because I've been asked on the chat channel.
The last question involved the use of fires, like wood fires. Do they provide sufficient infrared for health? And my answer was, as you heard, yes, they do, and they're very important.
Being out in sunlight is supposed to be good for various things medically. Okay, you referred to sort of feel good, and yes, mental health as well. And it's supposed to be good for hypertension as well, isn't it? Is that an infrared thing, or is that a different wavelength? Or
I think that the effect of the infrared inside the body, the effects of the infrared inside the body, we are realizing are many and various. And it certainly has effects on nitrous oxide, which has effects on hypertension and so on. So yes, it involves many of the processes inside the body in different ways, and we're just beginning to think about mapping these out. In fact, we spent a long time looking for very particular functions that the light was performing, and I think as we've moved on, we've realized that the light is in, the interactions of the light with the molecules in the mitochondria are many and various. They're not simple absorptions into a chromophore. There are other things like inelastic scattering. The electric fields of the photons can excite polarizations in highly polarizable molecules and transfer energy in many ways. And what I think we're doing is we're making parts of molecules in the body sing with vibrations. We're exciting vibrational states in molecules, which mean they sing, and that means they interact more quickly with other molecules. So it speeds up the whole process of molecular interactions. And we think there's a lasting effect of shining light on mitochondria. It has an immediate effect, but it also has an effect which lasts for many days and possibly weeks afterwards. And we think what is happening is that the exposure to the sunlight is allowing the mitochondrial population to regenerate their molecules in the endoplasmic reticulum, possibly, which give them an extra long lifetime. It's keeping all the mitochondria healthy and well
there
adjusted.
Is another thing with healthy mitochondria in there. If you, Nick Lane, is he UCL, the biochemist anyway, will argue exactly as you've done that, your mitochondria age and they're not healthy. And he puts it all down to free radicals, and that free radical generation is intrinsic to the process of the electron transport chain anyway. So it's complicated. So I don't know, are you saying that the infrared light will help mitigate against that?
I think it does. I think when I say cool the mitochondria, it means control the reactive oxygen population. Yeah. And I think, aging mitochondria spend more of their energy producing reactive oxygens than they do going down the electron transport chain, which is a problem. So yes, the infrared light slows down that process of, and also we think the infrared light increases the production of melatonin within the mitochondria, which of course is a very effective antioxidant. So it may be that the red light is orchestrating the reactive oxygen population inside the mitochondria to work more efficiently.
Okay, thanks.
On the chat channel, we have a comment here that a brilliant talk, and then in brackets, sitting under a tree is also an effective cure for seasickness. Now, you might think that, I don't think that question is as silly as it sounds, because you might think that there aren't many trees on ships. But I recall once getting very nauseous after an unpleasant channel crossing, and the nausea continued well after I'd landed. So I think that's quite a sensible question.
Okay, I'll go along with that. I won't answer it, but I'll go along.
Anyway, don't sit under I should have gone to sit under a tree. And then Charles Sturton asked, I think the answer to this is fairly obvious, is the regular use of sunbeds for tans a problem?
No, I don't think it's necessarily a problem. I think careful use of things like, I'm not an expert on this, so I'm not giving advice, but my impression is that if you get your body used to small amounts of ultraviolet radiation, which you'd use for generating a suntan, that gives you long-term protection against the really bad effects of sunburn. That's what I understand, but I don't feel terribly qualified to answer that. But I know why Charlie is asking that question. But
and I need to bring things to a conclusion pretty soon now, because we've run over time. We have a rather long question about which comes down to incorporating better lighting in hospital wards. And have you found NHS trusts receptive to this work and understanding of the critical importance?
Yeah, I'll answer that question. Yeah, we have conversations with people who operate intensive care units, especially in UCL, where we're working. And I think we've pretty much convinced the consultants there that this is a thing that they must do. This is not universal throughout the NHS yet, but I'm giving a talk at the Houses of Parliament in May to an all-party parliamentary group dealing with light pollution, where I will make this point very, very strongly. So hopefully we can get this into the NHS system, because in fact it's always complicated to do these things in practice, but it could be done very simply. If you have all these white downlighters in the ceilings, if you could safely make every third one a tungsten filament spotlight, a halogen spotlight, you could probably solve the problem almost immediately at very little cost. I'm sure it would have safety implications, all kind of problems, but in principle, it's very easy to solve this problem.
Well, I think that we're all going to have a lot to take away from this talk. And in my case, I'm really interested in the electron transport system in mitochondria, and I think there's a lot to learn about that. It's going to be fascinating how this develops, and I think, can we all show our appreciation to Bob, please?
Thank you, it's a great pleasure.
Yeah. Since about the 1960s. So, same record sounds.
Okay.
But there are versions since, but I think they remain very famous.
I have the Fairy Queen. I have the Fairy Queen at home. One of this.
I think they're different editions.
Yeah.
They may not always have the same things.
Okay. 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 Thank you. I'll look at it. Thank you very much for that. Okay. Thank you.
There are available now infrared panels. A friend of mine, his heating system broke down and he was segregated by mounting on the roof. So they are available now. The advantage surely is that they're actually heating you and not all the air in the room.
When you say infrared panels, what do you mean by that?
Well, I haven't seen them, but he says you can buy them, and they're actually infrared, it's producing the heat to warm you up in the room.
Yeah, but if they're transferring the heat to the room via something at 50 or 60 degrees, they're of no value. You have to have the infrared light on your body. There's a company called Herschel that makes infrared panels to go on walls to heat rooms, but they're effectively useless for what I've been talking about because they're too low temperature. Whatever's heating you has to be more than 2,000 degrees. Candles, lamps. So the panels are just like a water heated radiator is useless for what I'm talking about.